So we are back for another mini set card review. Today we've got the final legendary that you'll see here behind me. We've got the rest of the mage cards to go with it, and we've got the rogue cards that this will now allow you to run in mage as the rogue tourist. Because Portalmancer Skyla here is a 5 mana 4/5 rogue tourist. Battle cry, swap the costs of the lowest and highest cost spells in your hand, which is kind of a big spell mage support card. We've actually gotten this big spell mage package in Perils of Paradise for mage. It didn't land when the expansion first hit. It got buffed a little bit. It still hasn't landed. It still looks pretty bad, but this might give you a little bit of a different spin on it, and I'm not even sure you run that big spell mage package with this, because this demands you have low cost spells in hand if you want to cheat out the big stuff. So you got the 10 mana tsunami, and you have hopefully a 0 cost spell in hand. They swap, and you can suddenly play that tsunami on turn 5 next to your Portalmancer Skyla, which is actually really good. I will say that mage can kind of already do that. You know, they've got King Tide already. Play the King Tide on 4. You can absolutely play tsunami on turn 5. It's a little bit of a different look, of course, but it's not way better. It kind of makes me nervous that the King Tide line into tsunami has not been good enough. Will this be better when it demands additional kind of synergy? But again, also, these kind of exclude each other, because in the current big spell mage package, I'm trying to pull all this stuff up here. Give me just a second. I should have had these loaded up ahead of time. You know, you've got stuff like your Surfalipod. You don't want to run small cost spells because you risk ruining your Surfalipod. If this hits a 1 cost spell or a 0 cost spell or whatever that you've run for your Skyla, well, God, my Surfalipod's useless. So you might have to do away with the Surfalipod and instead lean into a package with rogue cards. Particularly, you're now going to be able to run Metal Detector in your mage deck with Portalmancer Skyla. This can get you a coin if you didn't already have one in hand from having the coin at the start of the game. And suddenly the coin's a great tool to swap with a high cost spell. So you can kind of play Metal Detector on 3, hit in, get a coin. On turn 4, coin out your Skyla, hopefully hit again for another coin so that you still have a coin in hand, or maybe you have the one from the beginning of the game. And then you can actually do a turn 4 tsunami because you have that coin in hand. Hit that tsunami with your Skyla, boom, 4/5, 4 water elementals, potentially cleaning up the board or hitting face. That is actually pretty crazy and a lethal kind of turn. Like, that is scary enough that it could just outright win the game. The challenge is having the Metal Detector on time, having something to hit, having your one of legendary, Portalmancer Skyla on time, having the tsunami in hand, or maybe some other big spell that pays off, right? But hopefully tsunami, I think that's the one that's the most compelling. So you've got a lot of things to kind of check off that list to make that turn. And then around that shell, I don't know what the rest of the deck looks like necessarily. It's like stacked up with, a bunch of big spells and some weird early game. But I will say there's some additional pieces that sound kind of interesting there. You've got Sea Shill can discount big stuff as well, because it's just going to discount any mage card because they're non-rogue cards. And then you've got Conniving Conman too. This is actually a way to replay the tsunami because it's actually going to be played from hand. So you're going to replay the tsunami if you play it with your Skyla. So like that could be a turn 4 tsunami into a turn 5 tsunami again. So like there are some crazy punches possible when you have access to these rogue cards. It's just that question of like deck construction. And I think if you do this, you maybe run these other coin pieces, right? You got this too, can generate some small spells and stuff, but you probably get rid of the mage stuff. I think you probably drop Surfalipod because it's not going to work. You probably drop Under the Sea because that's not good. Maybe King Tide can still hang on, but I think it's just a totally different looking deck. So can you get it all there? And by the way, I guess we should take a quick look at the new rogue cards as well. Some previews. I don't think any of these necessarily support that. This is kind of a way to find some big spells, but super unreliable. This is a weapon buff, and this is not going to help at all. This is kind of an academic espionage type thing. Maybe, right? Maybe. Maybe that's good enough just because it occasionally steals you a game and you can build a sort of competent deck around it other times. Beyond that, you know, I'm always kind of high on the tourist in general, just because who knows when having access to a different class might become really relevant as new cards get released, new expansions come out. Like, no, it doesn't get access to the new cards, but it can still unlock some synergies and stuff with the new cards that synergize with the current set of stuff that the tourist gives you access to. So, you know, it's just hard to write these off altogether. So this one is one with some really intriguing potential and combos. I just have some concerns about its consistency. That doesn't necessarily make it a bad card, though. So moving on to mage cards and talking about bad scores. This is Huddle Up. This is a new 7-mana spell, which I guess technically is another big spell for Big Spell Mage, but I think it's bad because it fills your board with random Naga. And shoot, I had this loaded up a minute ago. Let me pull it back up. The random Naga pool is really weak from a stat standpoint and from an effect standpoint, because the vast majority of these are battle cries. They just don't do anything. Just like really dead stats. A 2-mana 1/2, right? A lot of battle cries. No like rush or taunt hardly at all. I mean, there is technically a rush, but it's a, you know, it's a 1/1. Stuff like Aerosmith kind of has upside, but not really, because you just spend all your mana on the 7-mana thing. So there's just not a lot going on here. I mean, technically some sharpshooter rolls if you're like running a bunch of other Nagas, but it's just bad. You know, the highest statted things are just not even that big, frankly. So yeah, that is just not, you're gonna get boards of like a bunch of like 2/2s and 2/3s and maybe some 3/3s, a 1/5/5 or something, which it just does not keep up with the razzle dazzler boards, with the crazy things that happen in Hearthstone right now. There's so many ways to build really big crazy boards, and this is just not going to be one of them. Too inconsistent, too weak from an output standpoint. Cheating it out's like kind of cool, but there's other better things to cheat out. If you're going to cheat cards out in Big Spell Mage, there's better ways. That Tsunami is going to be a much better board that also, you know, has that interactivity via both freeze and the immediate attacks, and sometimes you just kill people. So this just looks horrendously bad to me. It's almost to the point where it's like, am I forgetting something? Is there some crazy line? Maybe you'll remind me of something insane and broken for this, but I don't know what it is. There's not, I mean, there are Naga synergies in Mage historically, but none that really play off this particularly well. So this just looks very, very bad as far as I can tell. Oh, and it's also in Druid, but it's also very, very bad in Druid. Even with Ramp, Druid has plenty of other ways to do way more cool things than Huddle Up is going to provide. So moving on here to the next Mage card. This is Burn Down, a 3-mana fire spell. Draw 3 cards and light them on fire. In 3 turns, any still in hand are destroyed. So we had this effect before on that Warlock card that did it to your opponents, but now you're doing it to yourself. And yeah, I mean, this is a 3-mana draw 3. You're planning to play the cards anyway. Any deck that's running this, they're going to be like low cost enough, or you're going to be playing enough stuff out repeatedly that you assume none are really going to get destroyed or burned. That does maybe exclude this from any sort of more greedy deck, control deck or whatever, that's running more expensive stuff or playing for a longer game plan. But, you know, I think a faster deck, basically that's, you know, it just says draw 3 for 3, which is okay. It's, you know, yeah, it's better than Arcane Intellect, of course. The people who haven't played Hearthstone in 8 years but still watch these videos will be like, hey, Regis, is way better than Arcane Intellect. And it is, but I just don't think it keeps up with other kinds of synergistic targeted draw that exists in Hearthstone nowadays. Mage has some of that now with some of the like manufacturing error and so on, and some of the no minion stuff, the spell mage stuff, but basically any given deck or package is probably going to have a way to generate resources or draw resources that doesn't really need this. Like, they're just gonna have, you know, a Naga deck's gonna have Naga stuff, and a spell deck's gonna have spell stuff. Obviously, this is a spell, you know what I mean? No minion stuff. And that probably means most decks just kind of leave this at the wayside because they've got something better. You know, that said, this is probably totally fine sometimes if you discover it and you just need some card draw in a pinch. One of those cards that's great to exist. Creates a fun little dynamic when that happens. You've got some cool decision making around it. So I like this design a lot, actually. I just don't think it's one that gets played a lot. I just think most decks will be able to do this effectively with other cards and other tools, so that this just doesn't really fit into any world. Maybe there's some like fire specific deck that comes along and this gets a little bit of a bump in competitiveness in that way because they just need a lot of fire spells or something. But for now, this doesn't really stand out to me as excessively strong. It's just okay, which is totally fine to exist, but not always good enough to make the cut. Oh, and Druid. Of course, I again forgot Druid. Druid obviously has 1,000 better ways to draw cards. Same exact story for Druid, but even more so, right? Like, Druid just does absolutely not need this. So moving on here to some of those rogue cards we teased earlier. This is the Robocaller, a 3-mana 3/2 mech. With Battlecry, draw an 8/8 and 8 cost card, and those numbers are dialed randomly each turn. That means while this is in hand, each turn is going to update to give you 3 numbers from 0 to 9. So any of the single digit numbers. So I'm told when this first arrives in hand, it's going to be 8, 8, and 8. So if you do have a bunch of 8s and you play it right as you draw it, like, yes, you might be able to get a bunch of 8s, but otherwise it might say draw a 0, 2, and 5 cost card. Might say draw a 6, 6, and 7 cost card. It might say draw a 9, 9, and 9 cost card. And that's where this gets really shaky, because if this just said like, hey, draw 3 cards, that would be really nice, you know. Draw 3 on a body for 3 mana would be kind of great. But how often is it actually going to draw you 3 cards? Particularly because high cost cards just aren't that commonly seen in mini decks, particularly rogue decks. Maybe, you know, if you're running this in a kind of big spell mage like we just talked about earlier with Skyla, maybe you have some high cost spells to kind of fill in the gaps there. Paladin, I think that wants to run a lot of lower cost stuff too, with the Lanessa copying low cost spells and stuff. So it's concerning that a lot of the times like 6, 7, 8, 9 might just totally whiff in many different rogue decks, and you might try to build a list that hedges around that a little bit and run a 6 cost card, a 7 cost card, an 8 cost card, 9 cost card, whatever. But then sometimes they'll be in hand still, and it's like, man, lining up the right moment. Maybe you'll say like, hey, it's okay, I'm just gonna wait until this hits the numbers that I need. Might be possible, but not always great. Sometimes you just want to be able to play this on turn 3 and hit some things. So then the question to me becomes like, okay, is this good enough if it draws 2 reliably? What if it only draws 1? If it draws 2, that's not terrible by any means. I think sometimes you'd be happy with that play, but it's again back to like synergy and consistency, and Rogue is not hurting for card draw. Hearthstone is not hurting for card draw. So just having one that plays to a game plan, or just, you know, that you can trust is going to work when you need it to work, and this might not work when you need it to work, I think that probably means this gets excluded. So this is a really cool design. I think it'd be really fun to try to play around this and build a deck around this, but I don't think most competitive meta decks are going to turn towards this when they need card draw. I think they'll find something that meets their needs a little bit better. Moving on to the next card here, it's Sharp Shipment. This is a 4-mana spell that gives your weapon +2/+2, which is actually a really significant buff. Not only, you know, getting some extra damage out of that, but that extra durability can scale into effects really nicely. We just talked about like that coin generating card, for instance, whose name I've already forgotten, even though I looked at it like 5 minutes ago. Making that like a 5/4 weapon means, you know, you're going to be able to activate the killing of minions more reliably so that you can get coins more reliably. Here it is, the metal detector, right? Making it as a 5/4, it's like, man, okay, I can kill a lot more minions and get coins, and I just get more coins over time because I have more durability. Like, this scales like crazy. Is that a reason to run this card? Nah, maybe not. I don't know if metal detector is good enough. But then remember, this can also be played in Mage and Paladin, and I think Mage is actually the most compelling place for this because of Cosmic Keyboard. This card, Cosmic Keyboard, after you cast a spell, summon an elemental that's got its stats equal to its cost, right? Sharp Shipment's an insane follow-up because this now not only buffs your Cosmic Keyboard for future uses, so you get extra durability. You probably don't care about the attack in this case. The extra durability goes a long way while still making a 4/4. Like, this is actually going to summon you a thing as well. So that's kind of a cool use case. It is, again, you know, a combo that's very time sensitive. It maybe doesn't scale super well into the late game. You probably have to hit the keyboard on 2, maybe even a coin to like play this on turn 3. But that's kind of got me thinking, like, that actually looks pretty cool. I know Cosmic Keyboard, when it hits early, feels like it is overwhelmingly good sometimes. Just having 2 extra hits on it and this costing 4 suddenly feels like it's a benefit almost, as opposed to a downside. And then in Paladin, I was thinking, like, is Painter's Virtue worth it? 2 extra durability on a Painter's Virtue is kind of a crazy amount of extra stats because, you know, you're hitting 4 or 5 things in hand for +1/+1. That might effectively be like +10/+10 and extra stats or something. Not to mention, you know, hitting charge minions and such with Leroy can make that even scarier. But oh, also it does give you +2 attack, which with a lifesteal weapon is not irrelevant. But I don't think that's very good. That deck is trying to like turn the corner a couple turns after Painter's Virtue. You don't really want to spend 4 mana to just keep delaying all of your stats later and later into the game. You kind of need to start pushing and getting there. So, not to mention that deck needs a high density of minions. You can't have too many spells because then there's less stuff to get buffed sometimes. So, you know, that's not the best use case, but still fun to explore some of these possibilities. So ultimately, I kind of don't hate this. I will say it's very expensive. Like 4 mana is a lot. It often will take a while to pay this off from that durability standpoint. Like that's often like 2 turns of activations for this to pay off extra. But there are some really cool weapons for it, and that doesn't even explore stuff like you know, the spectral cutlass. I see some rogues, you know, playing this these days sometimes in thief stuff. Like, you know, extra attack on this can go a long way too. You don't really necessarily need the durability though, so it's like, you know, is a deadly poison just kind of better for spectral cutlass? Yeah, maybe in that case. But I don't know, dude, this is intriguing. This is one of those cards I don't really think makes the cut right away. Probably not even with Cosmic Keyboard, but I definitely want to keep an eye on this one. Keep it in your back pocket because some weapon could come along that just turns this into something really silly, because it is actually a pretty nice buff in the scheme of things. All right, and then our final card for the day here is Agency Espionage. This, of course, a callback to Academic Espionage. 4-mana spell, shuffle a card from each other class into your deck. They cost 1. So we're all going to run this to protect ourselves from fatigue, right? Because fatigue is something you see so often in the modern era of Hearthstone. Man, I got so many fatigue games. No, of course, like, yes, this could theoretically do that, but that's just not going to be much of a relevant concern at all, I don't think. So instead, is this something you run in like a Thief Rogue deck to give yourself access to a lot of cards from other classes? Still no, I don't actually think that's very good either. Part of the problem is, like, you have to draw these. These are taking up a draw. So instead of drawing a regular card, you're going to draw one of these, which, yeah, sometimes you'll hit something crazy. You'll hit a tsunami or whatever, as an example we've used 1,000 times in this video, and it will cost 1, and that'll be amazing. But 90% of the time, you're going to hit something that's low cost already, because most cards are low cost, and it's not going to be synergistic. It's going to be some random Naga or Pirate or some garbage that has synergies that you can't use. It's going to be untimely because it's like, you know, you need face damage and it's a control card, or vice versa, and it's just incredibly super inconsistent. And although, yes, it could fuel some thief stuff for Rogue, there are lots of great ways to do that by adding things to hand, not by poisoning your draw, because you're just going to need so much more draw to move through this, to find your other draw or find the things that care about all the thief cards in the first place. So ultimately, this is just a way to like poison your deck and make it worse, and spend 4 mana to do it, by the way. Like, man, these spells are both really expensive when we look. Like, 4 mana stuff in Rogue is tough. And I don't think Mage or Paladin care anymore about this either, for the record. Like, yeah, like Paladin has Lanessa or something to benefit from some cheap spells sometimes, but it's like, how often are you even gonna get spells? This isn't spells, it's cards. They're gonna be minions and weapons and other things too, and then, you know, very rarely you're gonna hit big spells that are crazy to copy. So all in all, this looks fun. Like, I like these kinds of cards a lot, but it also just looks really, really weak to me. So that said, let's give these cards ratings from 1 to 4 stars. Portalmancer Skyla is a 4-star card. Huddle Up is a 1-star card. Burn Down is a 2-star card. Robocaller is a 2-star card. Sharp Shipment is a 3-star card. Agency Espionage is a 1-star card. And boy, those were some tough numbers in this one. Skyla's kind of a 3-star card too, to be honest, but I'm giving it a little bit of a nod for that crazy combo potential. But yeah, I don't really think these are going to get played much. These just don't seem to fit all that well. Seem kind of expensive. Like almost every card here, I wonder if you could take one mana off it and not totally break it, which isn't a great sign. So yeah, I hate to be a downer, but I don't think these look all that great. That said, it's kind of sad because some of these designs are pretty cool. Like this is a fun card that adds some dynamic decision making about how you play your games. This is a fun card that's pretty chaotic and introduces some deck building stuff. This is just a fun card that makes the game really fun. So I wish these had a bit more power level in my mind attached to them. But maybe you love them, maybe you think they're insane, maybe you think they're broken. Share those thoughts down in the comments below. Thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.